A friend of mine, a friend of mine who is my friend until we have this conversation in academia, I've asked him once, I said, why evolution, for example? The DNA evidence, very recent, in the last 5 years, the DNA evidence no longer supports the theory of evolution as the mechanism for human origins. Evolution is a fact. And I want to be very clear about that. As a geologist, I've seen it in the fossil record, plants, animals, insects, some primates. Something happened 200,000 years ago, and the theory breaks down when it comes to humans. And the DNA shows us that. The DNA shows us very clearly that we did not descend from Neanderthal, for example. Their genome, we can now rebuild their genome and compare theirs to ours. We can actually, sounds like Jurassic Park, the movie. Science fiction, but it's science fact. We can pull the DNA.
You can check your percentage of Neanderthal in
We can
you,
pull
right?
the DNA from the bone marrow of fossilized remains of beings that we are supposed to be descended from and compare their DNA to ours. We didn't descend from Neanderthal. It shows that we did appear on Earth about 200,000 years ago.
Where did we come from?
And this is why I think it's so important, Brian. It's more than a philosophical conversation. Rachel Carson was an author in the 1960s. She wrote Silent Spring. She was one of the first environmental authors about the use of the pesticide DDT back in the 1960s. And she made a statement, I read this when I was a kid, and it was so powerful. She said, we only destroy the things that we don't value. The textbook says that life is a behavior pattern that chemical systems exhibit when they reach a certain level of complexity. That's the definition of life that we're giving to our young people in school today. When we begin to see what the DNA is telling us, it tells us something far beyond random genetic mutations is responsible for us. And that's, I think, where the change in thinking must begin.
Okay. And do we know where we came from at this point? Or do we just know that there's some kind of strange anomaly where 200,000 years ago, new DNA is introduced that couldn't have been more from Neanderthal? We didn't necessarily come from some other mammal form.
We don't know. That's the whole. I released a book in 2017. It's entitled Human by Design. The first half of the book is the peer-reviewed science that is now revealing the facts that tell us that evolution not only is not, but it cannot be our story. And if you look at the charts, the Smithsonian Institute, for example, and you look at those very well-known evolutionary family trees. We're up here and all these other forms of life, and we're connected through these lines. If you look closely, the lines are broken lines because they are called inferred or speculative relationships. They're believed to exist, yet no evidence has been found to date. And if we were looking in the right place, I think we would have found something by now.
And whoever makes these rules, they end up having power. And even if it might not be obvious why they're doing it, there is power there, because if someone can try to convince you that this is the model here, there's all sorts of things that come with that. And then there's the status quo, and like you said, your own relationship to even who we are. So you're saying, look, the facts say this, we need to start, because you're a scientist, you're about the truth, and us finding a better outcome with this truth.
Well, within the context of the world that we live in today, this is the key. I firmly believe that when we begin to understand the truth of who we are, the reasons that we hate begin to vanish. The hate is based upon a way of thinking. We've been taught that nature, for example, the fundamental rule of nature is competition, conflict, struggle. And when I say that to an audience, they say, okay, Greg, big deal. Charles Darwin, he said that was 150 years ago, but hey, this is the 21st century. We have the internet. What difference does it make? And it's a really good question. And the young people, when I speak to the young people, they're amazed at the answer. And the answer is, yes, this is the 21st century. And the society that we live in today, the foundations of the society were put into place in the late 1800s, precisely at the time the theory of evolution was being embraced wholeheartedly by the scientific community. Our economic system is based upon this theory of competition. Our corporate system is based upon this theory. The way we share vital resources, energy, and food, and water in the world, it's all based upon this thinking of competition, conflict, struggle, scarcity. This is what we said to the UN. And as we globalize our world, and we're not turning back, we aren't going to go back to the world. I'm amazed how many people I talk to, some of my family members included, that say, you know, this is a speed bump in the road of life, and they remember what used to be, and they say, well, when things get back to normal, you know, we won't have these problems. I said, well, you know, what do you mean? They said, you know, when things go back to the way they used to be. We've never, as a society, we've never been given the opportunity to mourn the passing of the world that became familiar to us earlier in our lives, and that world is gone, and we cannot go back to a world that no longer exists. And as people begin to embrace that we are now living the new normal moving forward, this isn't a temporary speed bump in the road of life. It's a very, very different way of thinking. But as we, and when I say mourn, I don't mean we have to have a big, you know, outward, you know, sad expression. It is the acknowledgement that the world changed, and so many of the things that were familiar to us no longer exist. What would it be like, Brian, to have an entire generation of young people raised on this planet that believe that nature likes them, that they live in a world where they don't have to separate themselves from the very elements that constitute their bodies, that working together to achieve something is in harmony with the world around them rather than trying to beat someone else. And when I talk about competition, I'm not talking about a friendly game of chess or, you know, soccer. It's what's called violent competition in the biological world. That is not the fundamental rule of nature. And the more violent competition we see in the world, that tells us how far we have strayed from the truest laws of nature's harmony. And that helps to see a lot of what's happening in the world. This is what we said to the UN. Peer-reviewed science, some of this published in British journals in the year 2016-17. The journal Science, for example, was telling us that the new discoveries are that nature is, the fundamental rule of nature is cooperation. That is a 180-degree shift from everything that I was ever taught. What the DNA studies are now showing us is that the DNA that gives us our unique humanness, makes us who we are, that gives us our ability for sympathy, empathy, compassion. The neocortex, I know some of your other guests have talked about, it's the largest part of the human brain, 6 layers of the brain. Very unique neurons, no other form of life has. What gives us those things is a fusion of DNA that happened 200,000 years ago. Chromosomes were fused together in a very precise way, and beyond the fusion, after the fusion happened, there were portions of those chromosomes that were added, portions that were taken away, and stabilized this fusion in a way that scientists tell us cannot be the product of evolution as we know it today. There appears to be an intentionality. And this is where science now is in forbidden territory, because if there's an intentionality underlying the way these chromosomes were fused, it implies a purpose. And this is where science is up against a brick wall right now, because that is beyond the purview of what science as we know it can tell us. If this happened only in one chromosome, you could see maybe it was a fluke. Chromosome number 2, human chromosome number 2, is the result of one of these fusions. Chromosome number 7 that gives us our ability for complex speech, changes in there all exactly at the same time, 200,000 years ago, which is not long, slow, gradual change over time as evolution would suggest. Something happened, and we appeared fully intact, fully enabled, just as we are today, and we have not changed in 200,000 years. I don't know what did happen. That is not evolution.
Do you think that you will ever find out what happened?
I believe the scientific thinking has been that we need to find out what happened to understand the fusion. My feeling is just the opposite. If we follow, it's reverse engineering. I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer, software engineer. If we take what we have today and work backward to see what it took to give us what we have today, I think we'll find the answer. Whatever it is, what was happening, but you cannot do it in a vacuum. You can't only look in a microscope and say, here's what happened. You've got to look at the context, what was happening in the world, what was happening on the planet, what was happening in the cosmos, what civilizations were here, because nature doesn't know about those boundaries. Those are the self-imposed boundaries of our mind to put everything in boxes so that we're comfortable thinking about it. But if you remove those boundaries, there's a story that emerges, and it's a beautiful story. It's a powerful story. We're still writing the story. It's our story.
Yeah.
And I think that story will lead us to transcend the hate. It will lead us to transcend the war. And that's, not only is it interesting, I think it's vital. We must embrace the deepest truths of our existence if we're going to move forward as a planetary civilization. And this is what my work, every facet of my work, in some way addresses what I've just said.
Yeah, well, that's actually why we're here, and I call this the art of listening. And so when someone comes and drops into something like this, they're opening their minds and sometimes opening their brains quite literally to get your voice in their head. And so it's really empathy at the highest degree. And so we're trying to get people to lower the hate and to try to understand and empathize with everyone more, so we can go forward and not go to a place where we might destroy ourselves.
So I think when we look at the big picture, we can have the philosophical conversation, who are we, where did we come from? And it's interesting. We can look at ancient civilizations and say, yeah, it's cyclic, not linear. Are we making the same mistakes of the past? But where the spiritual rubber meets the road of life, for me, is how do we apply these ideas to what's happening in the world? And for me, the bottom line, you can pass laws that make genocide illegal. You can pass laws, we do in the US, to make it illegal to hate. There is a Hate Crimes Prevention Act. The laws make it illegal to hate, but they don't change the hate. If we're going to truly do more than put a bandage on the hate, the emerging hate that is shredding our families, destroying our communities, it's tearing nations apart, we've got to change the way we think. And for me, the way to do that is go to the core, to the deepest truths, to the essence of our existence. Who are we? How do we get here? Where do we come from? And what does it mean to be in this world the way we are today? And to take those discoveries then and implement them into new ways of thinking about ourselves and one another. And it takes a lot of work to do that. So as a scientist, I'll answer this two ways. As a scientist, when I look at nature and how nature accomplishes huge change, there's a pattern, and we are following that pattern right now. And what happens always in nature is this, is that the system becomes more and more and more complex, just as our world has become more and more complex, until the complexity is no longer sustainable. And then the whole thing goes into chaos and breaks down, but it doesn't break down to zero. It breaks down to give way to a higher order. I believe that we are globally in that natural process.
I hope we do evolve.
Well, I've never been more optimistic, because I think the fact that these things are breaking down in the presence of the information age is the key. If we did not have the information age and they were breaking down, I think it could go a different way. But as these things are breaking down, we have something to fall back on. Our plan B, as you've heard me talk about, my plan B, our plan B is already out there. We know there are other ways to do economies that are not based in competition. We know that there are other ways to create energy that don't destroy the environment. We know that there are ways of healing our bodies that don't require the damage to the body that so many pharmaceuticals do. I believe in pharmaceuticals in some applications. I think they're misused. And personally, my personal belief is that they're misused. We know all that. So it's easier to let the old ideas go because we've got something to fall back on. If we didn't have these other ideas, it'd be very frightening. I'm a realist as well as an optimist. And realistically, we are living a difficult time because we're in the middle of the breakdown. And if you don't get a higher perspective, if you just look at what's happening right now, it can be overwhelming. It can be frightening. If you sit back and you look at where we are, how quickly we've gotten here, and what the potential is, and you begin looking at these cycles, seeing the climate. When I look at the climate cycles, I'm really encouraged by what I see in geologic history. They are intense, but they're brief.
Okay.
They don't go on and on and on. We're living a brief, intense period of change. Something's going to give, and that give allows us to go to a higher order. So as a geologist, what I'll say is this. I've studied the climate cycles. So for our viewers, we largely know about climate through the ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland for long ranges of time. Shorter ranges of time, you can look at things like tree ring cycles, maybe go back 2,000 years or something like that, but they're not as accurate. So we're looking primarily at ice cores. What the ice cores tell us, they go back 420,000 years before present. The ice cores clearly show rhythms of cooling and warming for both temperatures and rise and fall of CO2. They clearly show that. Before this was politicized, scientists were all on board with what I'm saying right now. They also show that the temperatures typically rise first, and then the greenhouse gases rise after that. We see that in the Vostok cores from Antarctica, which means the CO2 is not the cause of the warming. We also see when the CO2 levels are high, the temperatures actually begin to cool more. We're actually in a global cooling. It's hard, doesn't mean the whole planet cools all at once, but overall, a global cooling. My concern is if the Earth cooled as much as it cooled in the past from the natural carbon dioxide, and we are contributing so much to that carbon dioxide right now, what is that going to mean for our future? So have we contributed? We have to say we are, because we're kicking tremendous amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, and it definitely is accelerating whatever change is happening, both the warming and the cooling. So to be very clear, global warming is a fact. I'm not denying that. We need to stop burning fossil fuel. We need to go clean, green, and we have the technology. We could do that today if we wanted to do it. If politics and money were not a factor, that could happen. Did we cause global warming? Warming is a part of climate change. We're always going through warming and cooling cycles. We didn't cause it, and we're not going to stop it. I can show you some awesome peer-reviewed scientific data that supports that from scientists who are not beholden to a corporation or a university, have nothing to gain and nothing to lose by sharing the facts. Do we need to change the way we live? Absolutely. The moment I started speaking about spirituality as a scientist, I lost my credibility as a scientist. So I have nothing to lose by being very honest with our viewers.
Why does that have to happen, Gregg? Why do you have to lose your credibility as a scientist when you talk spiritual?
Science, because that is beyond the purview of science, likes to work in boxes. And what we're talking about, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, myself, we tour together, we write together. I wrote the foreword for his last book. We are dear friends, spiritual brothers, we're colleagues. We've all had this conversation. We reached a point in our lives where we said we could go the academic route, we could write peer-reviewed papers, circulate them 6, 8, 10 years, and be published in an obscure journal and feel good about that, or we can take very well-researched, peer-reviewed science, truthful, honest, and factual, directly to the public. And we all felt independently, before we even knew one another, we said, we don't have the time to go through this peer-reviewed. Nothing prevents us from doing that. We still can write white papers, and we could submit those for publication, and we're working on some of those. But I'll give you a perfect example. I published the book in 2007. It was called The Divine Matrix. And it was the science that tells us there's a field that connects all things. Field of energy that connects all things. At that time, it was called Fringe. My hometown in Missouri, when I went back to Kansas City for a book signing, I walked in the bookstore and I said, where's my book? And it wasn't on the front, it wasn't in science, it wasn't in self-help. They said, oh, it's back there on occult, on the occult bookshelf. All right, that was 2007. Right now, that book is required reading in physics classes, both in Canada and some universities in the United States, because the science now has caught up with the popular opinion. We took this public, and everyone, if you ask someone, is there a field that connects all things? And most people say, yeah, sure, there's a field out there that connects all things. Science had to catch up. But for over 100 years, since 1887, the very famous Michelson-Morley experiment, 1887, Case Western Reserve University, they said there is no field. And science has been based on separation. Everything is separate from everything else since 1887. That experiment now has been repeated, better equipment, under the auspices of the U.S. Air Force, and lo and behold, the field is there, just as it was predicted in 1887. So this is an example where we took the work directly to the public. People accepted the idea. Science is now caught up with that principle, and I think we're doing the same thing with in other ways of thinking, including human evolution.
What's Gregg going to be doing 10 years from now? What do you think you'll be working on? What do you think you'll be doing with yourself?
I really don't know. And what I've learned is to be present. I'm in the moment. I love this world. I love the people of this world. And I have to tell our viewers, when we look, if you watch the 6 o'clock news, it can be very disconcerting.
Don't watch it.
Well, in the last 30 years, I've been on every continent of the earth. Not every nation, but I've been on every continent, except Antarctica. I haven't been to Antarctica yet. And what I've found is the people of the earth are good. We as people, we're okay. We generally care about one another. We know how to work together. We are tolerant of one another. But we're a family. We're a global family. And most people, I think, sense that. And for me, that's very reassuring. As I go, wherever I go in the world, I love the people. They generally care about me. I don't know that they love me, but they certainly care for me when I'm there. And it's very reassuring to see that it's not the people of the world that are doing this right now. And I think we all have an intuitive sense of what it takes to live and work together on this world. We all want the same things. You've heard this a million times. So, good life for our children, basic necessities, clean water, food, safety. We all want the same things. And I think we are moving very quickly toward a world that is going to reflect those deepest, most sincere needs that we feel from one another. But 10 years from now, I really don't know, because the world is changing so fast. What I found is that it actually doesn't serve me to make the plan. What I will say is I have a 3 to 5 year rolling business plan. I know what I will be researching, talking, writing about every three to 5 years, and that continues. And I've got some awesome research, archaeological research that I'll be publishing that supports many of the things that we're saying right now. Yeah.
What's something in your daily practice that is non-negotiable for you? What is something that makes you...
Two things.
Okay, tell me.
Two things. What I choose to put into my body, I learned a long time ago, is more than just filling the empty space of my stomach. When I was researching the ancient texts, there was a sect called the Essenes, the ancient Essenes. Mysterious sect 500 years before the time of Jesus. Jesus, as a teacher, was taught in these Essene, E-S-S-E-N-E, Essene traditions. They were called therapeutae by the Egyptians because they understood healing. And when the Master, Jesus, when he was asked by his students, what should we use to nourish our bodies, he answered them in a way I think it was so profound 2,000 years ago. And every meal I think of this. He says, if you put living food into your body, it will give you life. And if you kill the food that goes into your body, that dead food will also take the life from your body. And I can't think of a more profound way of saying the closer that we can eat to the raw and natural foods, processed foods aren't really foods. They fill the space, but they're not really food. So non-negotiable for me, the best quality of food that is available for me in the moment. If you're on an airplane, and for a few hours in the air, I have to eat something a little different, and that's the best I have in that moment, then I'll have that, and it's fine for me. And then when I get to wherever I'm going, I'll have something that's really good. So the nourishment and movement. My promise to myself is every day, sometime within the 24-hour day, I will do either a breath or typically yoga.
Yoga.
I'm a night person, and so often my practice will start about 5 minutes to midnight.
Okay. And you'll do like a 30-minute or 45-minute?
Yeah, it just depends on where I am, how jet lagged I am. Yeah, but a lot of my books are written between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. I'm a musician, as I mentioned. Musicians, when we play music out, we're usually playing into the wee hours of the morning, so night works really well for me. Yeah.
And so otherwise for food, something that's so kind of raw vegan, or just something that's close to the source?
When I'm at home, I prefer raw vegan. It's very difficult to eat raw vegan, and it's just about the quality of food. As little processing as possible. I don't do a lot of creams and sauces, and in other words, I eat for nutrition, not necessarily for taste, but I've learned that when something's really nutritious, it tastes awesome to me. So a salad, for example, rather than covering it with a lot of stuff to make it taste different, I've learned, and to me, the salad all by itself tastes really, really good with no dressing on the salad. Every lettuce has its own flavor. You know, a Bibb lettuce is different than a radicchio, you know, and carrots are different all over the world, and you know, and I love that. So,
well, something's working, because I think you're in your 60s and you look like you're in your 30s. So.
oh well, thank you. That's good to know today.
If I got a bunch of friends together, maybe it would be, you know, Bruce and Joe, and asked them what's Gregg's superpower? How is he able to do all the things he does? What would they say? What would they say allows you to do those things? What would be your superpower, do you think?
Superpower.
Yeah.
Wow, I've never been asked a question that way before. Bruce has said many times to me the reason he enjoys working so much is because of my integrity. And Joe said something, that's why he invited me to write the foreword for his book. He said, your integrity is uncompromised. So I'm not sure what it means to them. For me, what's important is to be genuine, honest, truthful, kind. Kindness, I think, is really, really important. We can be honest with other people about what we're feeling and what we sense in the moment, but there is a way to share those feelings that can be done kindly, or it can be done in a hurtful way. And I think honesty, I believe there's a responsibility being a public speaker on a stage. When I'm looking out in the audience and the 2,000 or 3,000 people out there, and I know some people that have come to listen to me can be in very fragile places in their lives, be in very, very delicate places. And I have to ask myself, when I'm going to share something, what is my intent in sharing this? Who does it help? Who does it hurt? How is it heard? And is there a way that I can share this still honest, but in a way that is non-judgmental, and that is not hurtful? And I'm a student of learning what this, and I'm also a student of listening. I've learned to become a good listener, and I'm still learning. And I've learned to listen from the people that I spend time with. What words work for you and what words don't? And it's different. So when I speak to, we're doing pilot programs with young people, and I have to use a very different language to elementary school and middle school, high school. I work with elders sometimes. Very different language with elders, and they have a very different attention span. When I'm with my typical audience, I can use my scientific language or lingo. If I'm with a technical audience, I'll use a different language. So it's about honoring those in my presence with a way of communication that's meaningful to them.
What scares you?
You know, I was just asked that recently, and I have to say, nothing. I'm at a point in my life where I honestly have to say I'm not afraid of anything. And I was also asked what mistakes I've made in my life, and I believe I've made no mistakes. And I'll tell you why I believe that. I think some of the outcomes could have been maybe better than others. Work is love made visible. 10 years old, I embraced that philosophy. And what that said to me was, whatever I say yes to, if I say yes that I'm going to do anything, if it's a video, a book, if I'm loading a boxcar or whatever it is, if I say yes, that means I'm committed 1,000,000%, and I will do my very, very best. And if I've done my best and I cannot do better, and it doesn't turn out the way I expected, it cannot be a mistake, because I did my very, very best. If I entered into it anything less than that, it could be a mistake. If I went into something and said, I don't really want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, or they're only paying me a little bit, so I'm not going to give them as much, that's not honoring my commitment. And that's where mistakes can happen. So I honestly can say I feel I haven't really made mistakes. I have had learning experiences. And when I think about the world today, I was just asked this recently, I can't really think of anything that frightens me, because there's a part of me that knows that I have within me the ability to transcend whatever it is that life brings to my doorstep. And I had to learn that through going through what are called dark nights of the soul. I've had a couple of them in my life. And you come out on the other end. You can come out devastated, or you can come out stronger. I was blessed to come out stronger. And in that strength, it has empowered me to see life differently and to think of life differently. And I really think that for me, I think it's true for everyone. I believe not everyone has reached the point where they see it the way that I'm seeing it. But I think everyone has the ability not only to survive, but to thrive in whatever life brings to their doorstep and to transcend those circumstances.
Gregg, this has been an incredible conversation. It really surprised me with the real sincere lessons that we have to act based on all of this science and the research that you do. And again, there's hours and hours of highly documented pieces out there on YouTube of Gregg talking about all these concepts, so you can go check it out. And I'm confident that a lot of what we talked about today is going to be echoed in our next film, Dissolution, because these are some themes that we're exploring with lots of different interesting minds, because we want to push forward and dig into this. So thank you so much for dropping these ideas on us. Thank you for your energy. It really shows through. Again, I'm so glad we had you in. You keep great company, and you more than exceeded my expectations. And again, this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to put out these ideas to literally put them directly into people's brains, so we can change the collective consciousness. And just, it only takes, like you said, an idea well presented with integrity to make humanity say, okay, maybe this is where we need to go. And again, when in chaos, a lot of great things can come out of that.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in our personal lives, we've seen that in history. And so we should all embrace this right now, knowing that it can lead to something greater. And I really appreciate that message, Gregg. So on London Real, we say it's about the journey. I wish you well on yours. Please come see us again. And I'll wear my cowboy boots next time as well.
Brian, I want to take just a moment. I want to thank you and acknowledge how important it is what you're doing here. I travel the world, and it is rare for people to have the opportunity to have presented to them in a way that is with integrity and that is done really well, honoring them, the time they're going to put into viewing something, a venue where they can see new ideas and to share just conversation in a way that's meaningful to them. So I want to thank you and your team. You've got an awesome team here. Thank you for your trust and for taking a few moments to share your day with me today. I appreciate it.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well,
All right,
thanks.
Gregg.